It's time, so let's start. We have just over an hour for sort of a lecture and a Q&A on information security. Basically, in 2013, the world where we live in now, if you're a journalist and you're doing anything of any significance, you are going to need this. And the other way around, if you don't need it, then really you need to think about what you're doing with your life as a journalist, essentially, because it's a journalist's job to write down stuff that other people don't want written and published. So that means that there's always going to be some pushback. My name is Arjen Kamphuis, and Michael is here also to help out and correct me if I say anything that isn't correct, and mostly we'll be just doing hands-on stuff today. All the pictures you see on the screen of this entire presentation, there is a link to this entire presentation on the last slide, so there's no need to make a lot of notes or anything. You can download the entire slide deck, and if you want to reuse it with some colleagues or whatever, then please feel free. So I live in Germany, a country with extensive experience when it comes to totalitarian regimes of all kinds of flavors and weird sort of overseeing apparatuses, the state hiring 1 in 4 Germans in the latter days of the Stasi to watch everybody else. So Obama made the big mistake of planning a trip there recently, and the last time he was there, 250,000 people came in Berlin. It was sort of a Kennedy-type moment. And this time, almost nobody showed up. The Germans were really, really quite miffed. And this was the viral image that everybody was emailing to everybody else. So it's the little girl, for those who are a bit Germanically challenged. The little girl says, "My daddy says that you can look into my computer." And Obama says, "That's not your daddy." So that is sort of where we are. So we had no idea when we planned this session about 5 months ago where we would be today, but certainly the events of the last 3.5 weeks have made this a lot more easier to explain to a lot more people. So it's made my life a lot busier, but also a lot more fun, because all the stuff that me and many other people have been saying for well over a decade essentially now turns out that we were not conspiracy tinfoil hatters. It was actually pretty much correct and then some, basically. So if you've been doing any of those things, like emailing, storing photos, vote polling, whatever, on any of these services, then you are also in the NSA database. So I don't think there's a single person in the Western world who's done anything digitally over the last decade that is not in there. So I just saw this yesterday. Kremlin's going back to old school stuff. So they're just reading all the John le Carré novels from the 60s and, going back to those, because that might actually be good. And actually one of the ways of solving some of the problems we were discussing might not be using a computer and not be using all kinds of modern gadgetry with power plugs, but going back to sort of old school, spy novel, Cold War era type trickery. Some bit of tradecraft there is not necessarily bad. The sentence I've heard most of the last month, and it's been completely infuriating, is "I have nothing to hide." And my first reaction is, I'm really sorry that your life is that boring, because I just don't believe it. I mean, I genuinely don't believe it that people don't have something to hide. Even they may not even be aware of it themselves, but seriously. But really, it's sort of a code, I think, for people who say, well, actually, I've never thought about the problem up until now, and really, I'd like to keep it that way, please, because this stuff is making me really uncomfortable, so I'd rather just, push it away. Now, the White House press secretary said, "Oh, we're going to have a discussion about the trade-off between security and civil liberties." And it's rather sad that somebody working in the White House doesn't seem to understand what civil liberties are for, because they are the last line of security against your government, which historically, of course, is always much more scary than any criminal or even terrorist organization. I mean, terrorists might kill a few people, but of course, if you're talking genocide, it always takes a government. So I think the reason for having privacy alongside, free self-expression and feeling nice about that you can just do something and not feel watched, but really privacy is the last line of defense when everything else fails. And in a society where privacy is possible, resistance to the government is possible if that's necessary. In a society where there is no privacy, no resistance to the government is possible. And then if your government goes off the rails, there is no way back. Like in East Germany, resistance was really, really difficult. But even there was a little bit of resistance. In German-occupied France, there was a significant amount of resistance because the surveillance was not so good, which was actually a good thing. So this is sort of what happens in people's brains when they are confronted by some of these things. That especially Westerners have this very strong, and especially Brits and Dutch people, my home country, have a strong tendency to really, really want to believe that despite everything, despite all the data and all the evidence, their country and their government is fundamentally good. Because once you stop believing that, then you face the difficult choice about, well, you know, then being a decent human being myself, what am I going to do about it? Because of course, if you notice that your government is really, you know, getting evil tendencies, you cannot not do something about it and still look at yourself in the mirror if you're a slightly moral, sort of politically aware person. Now, the easiest way to avoid that conflict is to just refuse to believe it, which is what people are doing on a massive scale right now. Now, the Germans, having had some interesting experience with what happens to your country if you don't protest in time enough, they have a bit of a different take on these things. So they take their government to task, and I think the way the German government has been dealing with all these revelations might just sort of, you know, cost them a lot in the coming elections after the summer. It will be interesting to see. But this is the mental thing. So for you as a journalist yourself, you're probably aware of this. You will also, in the future, probably be explaining some of the things I'm going to be explaining now in the next few hours to your sources, because you'll be needing to communicate with them in a secure manner to protect you and them and maybe even other people. So they might also go through, you know, a little bit of this, and you'll have to explain it to them as well. Now, a little bit about technology. This was my father's computer back in 1977 when he worked for the research part of the Dutch equivalent of BT. It's a DEC PDP-11. It cost $250,000 back then, and that was 1977 when a dollar was still actually worth something. And it's about 10,000 times slower than your mobile phone. So that's sort of what has happened in my lifetime. A bit more visually, here you see an older Mac and a newer Mac, which is a computer pretending to be a mobile phone. So that mobile phone, which is a computer under the hood, outperforms this computer in every possible dimension pretty much, but it's now inside your pocket. So an iPhone 5 is the computational power equivalent of a supercomputer from the late 80s, early 90s, on which, you know, NASA was running climate models and stuff. You can do that on an iPhone 5 today. Of course, most people prefer Angry Birds, but you could actually do climate research with it. So when I work for big corporations and big government institutions, and you're trying to talk to senior administrators and managers about information strategy and technology strategy, they tend to have this really sort of hands-on operational approach to how you make choices around the technology. So they tend to think, you know, a computer is basically just a better typewriter. And so it's a tool, and we have this utilitarian operational approach to it, and we don't have a lot of sort of principled thinking around computing, computer networks, and those kinds of things. We just, you know, we need to buy a little box, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be reliable, but sort of the higher level sort of political strategic thinking is not so much being done. And this is also why in Europe we have now ended up in the situation where we are, where our societies can be effectively shut down from across the pond, which was unnecessary. So if you want to understand the political sort of ramifications of this whole range of technology, you just have to look back into history. At some point, that machine, 1440, was invented, the Gutenberg printing press, and it pretty much changed everything. Prior to that, the Vatican was in charge from, you know, the southern tip of Spain up to into Scandinavia even. And if you didn't agree with them, they would just come and chop your head off. That was it, and there was no thing. And with this machine, we dropped the cost of reproducing and disseminating information by about a factor of 10,000. And that meant that now lots of people had lots of books, and other books than just the Bible, and at least the Bible in other languages. And this gave us about 250 years of civil war in Europe, because everybody was now reading the Bible and starting to think for themselves and having scientific ideas and all those kinds of things. So it gave a bit of a conflict, but in the end, you know, our modern world came out of that conflict. But it took us a couple of centuries to figure it out. Now we're doing the same, because we're plugging computers into a global network, and so now everybody has their own printing press with a global reach. So everybody here speaks fairly good English. That means that, you know, if you start a blog, your potential audience is about 2 billion people. And you don't need anything expensive or complex to do it today, and it doesn't cost any money. It's just a matter of having something interesting to say. You can reach a lot of people. the impact of these technologies is really just beginning. Everything we're seeing up to now with IT, this is where printing presses was in the mid-16th century. We're having the first little scuffles of something that looks like a civil war. WikiLeaks would be a prime example right now, and revelations of Mr. Snowden, but this is just really the beginning. And it is quite possible that all the big institutions that grew out of the last revolutions, such as the nation state, are not going to survive the consequences of this new thing, because they seem to be genuinely really confused, slow, and panicky in their response to this. So, especially as journalists, you need to recognize that computing technology is a political tool, and it's a political force in society, as well as a bunch of technologies, that you need to buy and own and take care of and stuff like that. So Dr. Richard Stallman yesterday, I don't know who was attending his lecture, but he made a few very salient points on that. Now, the other thing, we need to understand that the world has gone significantly weird, particularly in the West, over the last decade. I really try to avoid flying these days, because I just am very annoyed to be participating in bullshit security rituals that everybody who is involved in them, both the passengers and all the people in blue doing the checking, everybody knows it's bullshit, yet everybody participate, which I think sort of, the beginnings of clinical insanity. Yet you don't want to make a joke about it even to the security person, because then you might miss your flight. So we are all doing these weird things like handing over our bottles of drink and taking off our shoes and things like that, and handing in your nail clippers, but you can still take your laptop with you. But then you have to shut it off because it's dangerous to the airplane. Well, then why can't I have it with me? I mean, it's, when you think about it, it's just complete insanity, yet we all participate. And of course, our media system is rather failing badly, a bit more in the US maybe than in Europe. So this is an actual screenshot from an actual Fox broadcast that puts Egypt right there, smack in the middle between Syria and Iran. And this was their way to explain to their audience the strategic implications of the Egypt revolution back 2 years ago. That it was really worrisome if these out of control people would do democratic things and stuff. So this is mainstream media, which is why I mostly avoid it, actually. I am very picky, because the misinformation is just so thick that, why even bother? And there are good alternatives now. Now, the other thing in the Middle East that happened was the Stuxnet virus, which was a little contraption built by Israel and the US together. People were thinking that for a few years already, but now we actually factually know this is true, because the US is actually suing American whistleblowers over this. So they wanted to take down Iranian nuclear installation, despite the complete lack of evidence that it actually has any military purpose, according to their own intelligence services. I'm not just having an opinion here. This is what the US intelligence apparatus itself says. But they wanted to take it down, so they wrote a virus that would destroy the centrifuges in Iranian plants, and they let it loose in the world. And it, of course, it didn't only get into the Iranian plant, it got into millions of other machines all over the world. And then, of course, people found it and identified it and isolated it and put it back together, and now everybody has it. Everybody who wants to has that technology. And the type of industrial controllers that run these Iranian plants also run probably things in this building, like the elevators and the air conditioning. And they run the sluices that keep Amsterdam dry, and they run important infrastructures and hospitals and ports and airports and anything and everything. And many of those are connected to the internet, and many of those things connected to the internet have the factory installed default password on them because nobody bothered to change it. So the password tends to be change_on_install or stuff like that. So now we have a situation where the West, which is completely dependent on having a workable computing infrastructure, has unleashed on the world a cyber weapon of fairly high grade that now is, can be used by anyone. And we've also created a lot of people who don't like us over the last decade. So this is a real problem. This is the ultimate example of, if you live in a glass house, don't throw with rocks. And we have been throwing a lot of rocks for no appreciable result. This is a blog post I wrote a couple of days after the PRISM thing broke. I saw a lot of angry foot stamping of people. How dare those Americans, and it's a disgrace and a scandal and yada, 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 yada. But what was completely missing from all the political debate, and I was mailing a lot with members of European Parliament, what was completely missing from the debate is actually the EU, in an internal memo from July 2001, had already recognized this problem and had already written down what the solutions were. And there are technical solutions to prevent PRISM being a problem for Europe. And we knew that in the summer of 2001. But then, it was July that the report came out. Then everybody went on holiday, and then something happened in New York, and everybody sort of forgot about it. And fast forward 10 years, and now we are all in pretty much deep doo-doo. So the big scandal of PRISM for Europe is not that the Americans are doing bad things, may or may not be aided by some of their European countries. The tragedy here is for European citizens is that Europe and many nation states knew exactly what to do in terms of IT policies to prevent this, namely the kind of teaching that we're doing should be done in every secondary school from age 13 onward. Every child should learn to encrypt their email. That should be educational policy. Governments shouldn't run on software that they can't control. That should be government policy. That was all written down back in 2001. It was just never executed. Now the interesting question is why. As usual, of course, most of these things can be adequately explained by stupidity, but there was probably some American pressure as well, political pressure, to do it. So governments in this space are at the very best just completely incompetent and quite possibly also partially your enemy. Now, where they act as an enemy of the people they're supposed to represent, you can see it in many other IT security policies where basically we have the equivalent of a situation where we have a large piece of a city where all the front doors of all the houses are made from exceedingly thin plywood that sort of curls up at the edges whenever it rains. And because of that, there's a lot of burglaries. And the government response is to give more guns to the police officers. Instead of saying, hey, maybe we need to replace the front doors with something a little less flimsy. Maybe we need to teach all our citizens just exceedingly basic information security protocols. So when they get this funny mail from the Ukraine that appears from their auntie that says, please click here for a nice photo, that they recognize that their auntie doesn't operate on a Russian, domain. Or if you get a mail that seems to be belonging from your bank and it says helpdesk.something.ru, then maybe that's not your British bank. But most people aren't taught to read the URL that they click on and they type in, so they have no idea. This is something you could teach people in 20 minutes, and it would save Europe hundreds of millions every year in sort of low-level cybercrime. Yet our governments, through sheer stupidity or for some other mysterious reasons, elect to not do this. This is quite serious. So as I said before, whether you're a journalist or doing something else that is socially relevant, if they're not after you, you're not trying hard enough, basically. And my sort of personal rule of thumb on when you do activism or being politically active is that the more effective you are, the more pushback you will receive. So most of the activists, well-meaning, lovely people with impeccable morals, but actually, if you're not getting arrested every now and then, it probably really doesn't matter that you're waving a placard with whatever slogan is on there. Now, if you're actually impacting some people, then you're going to get, arrested, pushed around, and bad things will start to happen. If you're really effective in changing society, usually you end up getting shot. So you all have to pick how far you want to go. But this is a good, if you don't feel the pushback at some level somewhere, then I don't know. You just need to figure out how you can be more effective. Now, the word social media has been floating around the last 5 years, which is a bit of a weird term because of all media are social somehow. And as a bit of an old school internet user, I never really understood how Facebook is fundamentally different from the email lists that have been around since the late 70s at least. But of course now, we have pretty pictures and stuff like that. The problem with these new things is that we start using them without actually really understanding what they are, how they work, and what they're for, particularly. So we see that with Facebook and Twitter, especially, that people use them for a very wide range of things, but they don't seem to be thinking through the long-term consequences of that use. So they post all kinds of photos in interesting, embarrassing situations, and those photos are going to be around forever. So you can delete a picture of your Facebook page, but that doesn't mean it's deleted. It's just deleted from your profile. But Facebook still has it and may share it, store it, repurpose it for something, and it now becomes their material to use in the future. So with email, we've pretty much figured out how to use it, at least in an operational sense. We'll be learning some basic security today. So everybody understands the difference between the reply and the reply to all button in your email program, and the interesting organizational consequences if you pick the wrong one at the wrong time. To all stuff, and it's really interesting stuff can happen. With these things, it's so new we haven't figured it out yet. So mobile phones, we have figured it out pretty much. Email, we figured it out. This is so new and so that you really, I would want to be sort of a bit hesitant about what you use this for. So there are very good reasons for using Facebook because it's very convenient and it's free, so that's nice, and it's everywhere and everybody has it, so you can be on it too, and then you can communicate with everybody. But the problem is, the difference with email and Facebook is that with email, I'm sending a message to you and there's almost nothing in between. There might be Google in between, but we can do something about that. But you can elect to go somewhere else and I can still send you email. I don't need to know, what your email provider is or what kind of computer you have or anything like that, as long as we can exchange messages. And we can do this actually very securely at very low cost. With Facebook, of course, you're always not sharing a message with me, you're also sharing it with everybody who works at Facebook, plus 4.5 million Americans with a security clearance, plus our friends at GCHQ down the road. Plus maybe some other people, I don't know, maybe the Bank of China at some point is going to buy Facebook and then it's a whole new ballgame. Whomever you're sharing it with and you don't actually know, it's completely out of your control, already today and certainly going forward into the future. So while there are very understandable, practical, operational reasons to use things like this, there are maybe more strategic reasons that you might want to not use it. So it's a bit like this material. It's called asbestos. It's a wonderful building material. I mean, it's very light, it's very strong, it insulates, it's fire retardant. It's really, we should be building everything out of asbestos when you think about the building properties of this material, particularly, of course, children's schools. Yet we don't, which has nothing to do with the building properties of asbestos. It has to do with this other property that it gives you cancer. So I think things like Facebook might turn out to be sort of the digital asbestos of the future. Yes, it's very convenient to use it, but really we shouldn't. Or it should only be operated by trained professionals wearing special clothing. So just to help you a little bit thinking about sort of every individual problem, because you're all going to have different risk profiles and all going to have individual different specific problems. And we can't fix them all today, but we can give you some sort of mental tools to think about those problems and to come up with workable solutions. Easy to remember acronym when it comes to security, CIA. The question always breaks down into confidentiality, which is what people think most about when they think about security. Can I prevent people who shouldn't have their mitts on the data to have it? But quite often, even more important is the integrity of the data. So if you have an email that you send, and it can be intercepted, altered, and then sent on, so that the recipient thinks that you've mailed them something else than you intended, that might even be worse than just somebody listening in on the email. So sometimes integrity is more important even than confidentiality. When it comes to medical databases, I would say that certainly when you're actually using them on real humans, the integrity of that database, of say having a registry of blood types of 1 million people, the integrity of that database might be more important than the confidentiality of it. The third thing is, of course, availability, because if you can't get to the data, then what's the point of having it in the first place? So the first two are very easy. You just shut off the computer, bury it in a safe place, right? But then you can't get to it, so what's the point? So in every problem, you need to balance those three things, and you need to think about, what problem are we trying to solve here, and what's the worst sort of outcome that could come out of this if one of these is broken. Now, when it comes to organizations, I always have one sort of big question for with any client. I say, okay, yeah, we have a set of rules that we're going to think up now, and how we're going to make sure that they apply to everybody. Or are they only applying to people making up to 4 times minimum wage? And there's like sort of a layer of aristocracy above that who can just muck about and do all these weird things. I see this a lot particularly in the non-profit sector. The medical arena, also in governments. So security is a bit of a nebulous term, but you can break it down into confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and you get sort of a bit of a mental grip on it. And then there's 2 aspects that we both need to deal with to make it work. Behaviors, which is things like don't write down passwords, particularly do not write them down on little yellow papers that you stick underneath your keyboard. You'd be amazed how many you can find, and just go around a big office and turn over keyboards, and it's amazing the treasures that are there. And of course the technology. You need to have systems that are non-leaky. And if either of those fails, then the other one is irrelevant. So you can buy your million-pound Cisco firewall, but of course if then the systems admin has its own little home web server where he has a zip file with all his passwords, then that will get hacked into and it doesn't matter. Also, if you do everything right but your system is leaky, and as we've seen in the news over the last few weeks, a lot more systems are a lot more leaky than we previously dared to dream, then it also doesn't work. So having ginormous passwords on an iPhone doesn't matter, because the iPhone is fundamentally insecure because you don't control its software. So what are we protecting? Against what threat are we protecting it? It's different if you're protecting yourself from, say, the Ukrainian mob. It's a different threat than if you're protecting yourself from the NSA. But never underestimate the Ukrainian mob, because they can actually hire private, security people who may be former NSA employees, because if you have money, you can hire almost anybody. Against what threat, and how are we going to protect it, and why do they work? So if we are protecting planes from blowing up, impounding bottles of water, I have no idea. I'm sure it's great for water bottle sales at airports, but I don't see how it improves security. So you need to ask tough questions about proposed measure. How does this actually help? And how do we know that? How do we know that this, from what sort of experience can we see it? Keep asking tough questions. And tough questions, and keep asking them is much more important than knowing all the technical nitty-gritty details, because that's something you can always get help with. But being mentally able to ask the tough questions, and of course that's what journalists are supposed to do, that is the real job here. So I personally stopped using pretty much Microsoft products, period, in 2001 when I started working for myself, and I no longer had to have the man's laptop, but I had my own laptop. And since 1999, there have been strong suspicions by security researchers that particularly Microsoft Windows was fundamentally unsecure. As in, not just 400 new viruses a day, which is really bad, but as in there is a built-in backdoor in every Windows system, at least since Windows XP. And yeah, we now get more information that actually turns out to be correct. That is really, really bothersome, because it means that everything you do on top of that in terms of security, having an email encryption program installed on your Windows computer, can be defeated simply because all kinds of parties, and not necessarily limited to a few big governments, can just get underneath all that encryption on the operating system and just do stuff there. And so anything else you then build on top of that doesn't really help you. The same with most tablets and things like iPhones. And so this is a hard problem, and keeping your individual system secure is the hardest problem. It's setting up encryption is not hard, but then making sure that your computer isn't hacked so they can get around the encryption, that's the hard bit. Edward Snowden has said literally the encryption really works, and NSA cannot crack it. But what they can crack often is the laptop or the PC, and so that will become the target. So you need to have a wall, just like in the olden days, to prevent nasty people from getting in. But then just having sort of some passive protection is not enough. You need the burglar alarm so that somebody scales the wall, that then you'll know. Now, on professional computer systems and networks in companies, you'll have things like intrusion detection software. Of course, on your laptop, this is a bit more difficult. But it would be good to be aware of the fact that you have no good burglar alarm on your laptop. Just simply being aware of the omission already makes you a bit more, oh, okay, if it starts to act funny, then maybe I'll need to have somebody look at it. Or maybe what I need to do is to just, every 2 or 3 months, if I've been to one of these more troublesome countries, like Iran or the United Kingdom, one of these countries where governments does really weird stuff, what I need to do is I take my laptop, I need to take my data off, I need to completely wipe the hard disk, or maybe just rip it out, toss it away, get a new one, and reinstall it, and maybe get some help with that. So that could be a good way to just return your system to a completely clean and known secure state periodically, instead of just leaving it going for years and years and years, and God knows what sort of evil software crap is lurking in the background watching over your shoulder. Now then, if you have a detection mechanism, or if you detect that something is going on, whether through electronic means or just because your laptop or your mobile phone is now starting funny, if your mobile phone suddenly experiences a significant drop in its capability to hold the battery charge, then that is often a signal that it's sending, it's doing a lot more data sending than just you doing your Angry Bird stuff, which would be an indication of that it's that. So when you notice, then you need a reaction plan. Then something needs to happen. Now, it doesn't have to be flying monkeys or Chinese police officers on segways, but it needs to be something. And it could be as simple as, okay, now I need to, make a phone call to my befriended tech person that can help me out, or I need to talk to the IT manager of the organization I'm working for. Hopefully, if there is an organization you are part of, they have an actual plan, which is more than just call Bill. But those are the three elements that, whether you're an individual, solo working person, or an organization, that everybody needs to have that. These three things. Now, secure hardware, this is where it begins. The best thing to be reasonably sure that you have a piece of hardware that doesn't contain built-in spying devices already is to buy it in cash in a city being not the city where you live, in a shop that you didn't call, before you went there. Do you have Model X? I'd like to have some. Just find out with secure browsing, which will show, where you can buy something. Go there, leave your mobile phone at home when you do this. Walk up to the shop with a wad of cash and say, I'd like that box, please, and then take it home. Personally, what I then do is take it home, I open it up, I take out the hard disk, which is one of these spinning, moving parts thingies that I don't want anyway. I toss it out, including possibly the Windows installation that's on there. Stick in a solid-state hard drive and then install something that is secure, which we'll show in a minute. Laptops are now no longer the price of small cars, which, what they used to be like 15 years ago. So it is possible to actually just every now and then buy one professionally. Compare to, say, a plane ticket to maybe, somewhere where you might fly to. Actually, a laptop isn't that much more expensive. You can get a nice sort of low power but adequately portable one for £400. And of course, if you need more, if you need to do video editing, then it's a bit more. It can actually be advantageous to have cheaper laptops, because you will be tended to just sort of destroy it if you think that there might be a good reason to suspect it from having a bug planted into it or something. If you have a £3,500 laptop, you will be very hesitant to drop it, right? So it might be actually good to use cheaper ones. And actually, if you're just using web browsing and emailing and typing an article, even the lowest power laptops today can do that just fine. You can get one for £160 and just use it for 2 months and throw it away, or give it to a school or whatever. So one of the other things, we have several cases also here in the UK where people running their service or using services under US domains, which is things like .com, .org, .net, .us, obviously. It turns out that the American government in this case believes that if you do that, you now operate de facto on US soil and you fall under US law. So if you are a British citizen running a web server, and the web server is in the UK or in the Netherlands or in some German data vault somewhere in a nice safe place, but it operates on a .com address, the US government asserts that it is now US sovereign territory and the Patriot Act applies. And if they get a call from one of their sort of, copyright infringement lobby groups that they want to have you, then they can ask you to be surrendered to them and be tried under US law, even though as a European, under European law, you may not even have broken a law. We've had a case here in the UK where a family had to fight for 2 years to prevent their son from being handed over to the US for a 50-year incarceration for something that isn't even an indictable offense in most European countries. So one of the things to do is to get domains that are secure. I like Switzerland, CIJ, Confederation Helvetica. The Germans have a fairly solid constitution and a fairly solid constitutional court, which is designed to protect citizens from the state, whereas in the Netherlands and the UK, the UK doesn't even have a constitution, and the Netherlands has a constitution which has all the strength of sort of, flypaper in a rainstorm. Because the Dutch constitution basically assumes that the government is always good, which makes you really wonder what the hell it's for in the first place. And of course, Britain only has a set of sort of ways of doing things. These countries are fairly solid, although Iceland now is a new government, so it might be slightly less principled than the last one. But these are fairly solid domains that will actually protect your server and won't be taken down very, very quickly. Also, if you use services, whether it's Gmail or something under a .com, again, it's Patriot Act, which means you have less civil liberties than the lords who signed the Magna Carta. You basically have no rights, period. So a lot of what we'll be doing later on will be protected by passwords. There are other ways to protect access to a system, but this is still the most used one. And if used correctly, it can be absolutely fine. It can solve most problems quite adequately, and it's cheap and it works. But picking passwords and using good one and not reusing them all the time is not a super easy problem. Most people have a few passwords and they reuse them all over the place, which means that if LinkedIn has a break-in and they leak their password database, which is connected to your real email, if you're a LinkedIn member, I think quite a few people might be, then that password, you may use it for 24 other web services, and now of course this is going all over the place, and people can actually try it because they can figure out through Google what your login is for Facebook and then see if that works. So that's bad. The best way is to have a limited number of really good passwords and a little program on your computer that manages the other 70 ones that you use for all these web services. So pick really good passwords for the important stuff, like access to your computer, access to your email, access to your email crypto key. Those would be the three sort of big hitters. And then there's like tier 2, which is maybe something like your Amazon account, which is attached to your credit card. You don't want that floating around the internet. And then there's probably a whole bunch of really low-level stuff where actually, they want you to have an account, and so but actually you could use something. It doesn't really matter. So you have to think about how important is this thing I'm doing with the password. What are the implications if people guess that password? So if it's access to your system, once people have that, then everything else pretty much breaks down. So that is a really important one. I find that the easy way for people to deal with longer passwords, I prefer sort of 15 characters as sort of a minimum these days, that's not too easily cracked, is to not do the thing with all the letters and the capitals and all that stuff, but just take a sentence or a phrase from a song or a movie or a book or a poem that you like. Not your favorite movie that's on your Facebook page, because that would be maybe a bit too easy, especially the one that's on the poster of the movie. Don't use that one. But something else, something that is very easy for you to remember, but very hard to guess for everybody else. And don't ever, ever, ever write it down in any way, shape, or form. Also, don't use password management apps on insecure platforms like mobile phones. Because, yeah, it's encrypted, yeah, but the phone itself is just completely insecure. And so as soon as that information goes on the screen, that means it's now decrypted in the memory of the phone, and there might be another application on that phone that just sends all that information to God knows where. We just don't know. So don't use that. There are password management programs that you can use on a safe PC that are fairly safe, and those can be convenient. So this is one of the things that happens. I was on the French Thalys at some point, and you get complimentary Wi-Fi, which is really convenient. But then they want you to have an account on their system to access the Wi-Fi. So you have to fill in your mail address and a password. And then, of course, many people will use a password that they use for 15 other things. And then you press the send button in the browser. And what happens is that this information is then sent over the wireless network in the train, where there are 300 other people also on this wireless network, in the clear, no encryption. So the password is literally there in plain text. Anybody else with a little Wi-Fi reception piece of software that can be downloaded for free off the internet can now see your password in relationship to an email address which is uniquely identifiable to you. And if you then use that password for 10 other things, they can now have access to that too. So this is really, really horrendously badly designed. And I did two things during the rest of the journey. I listened to everybody else's network traffic that was in the same train as me over the wireless network once I was logged in, and I saw all these interesting things floating by, passwords, and people were doing e-banking and downloading porn, and it was quite amazing. It's amazing what people do in public places if you can look on their screens remotely. The other thing, I sent quite a pissed email to the organization of Thalys, showing them this, and guys, what are you doing? And they sent me an email back, yeah, we're working on it, and here's a complimentary upgrade for your next, but they still haven't fixed it. So the Thalys, which is the French high-speed train between Paris and Amsterdam. But probably the same applies to many of these other, hotspots in airports and all that kind of stuff. Now, we all receive these mails, and probably as a journalist, you might actually receive mails that are tailored to you individually, because that would be a great way of infecting your system with something to then, take it over and defeat any other security measures you have. So you just click there and something happens and now your computer is infected. This happens every day, all the time, to thousands and millions of people. If you're a journalist and you have a bit of a profile, somebody might actually not, do a bulk send. This is sent to like 1 million people, and then they hope that, a few of them click. So that's called phishing, with PH, hacker speak. But over the last years, we've seen the development of what's called spear phishing, where criminals go after sort of high-value targets, which you may be as a journalist. And so they're not just sending out 1 million emails, they're sending out one email to you, and it's designed to make you believe it's a credible email, and so there's a credible reason to click that link. And they might Google you, they might look at your Facebook page, they might look at who you've been mailing with or what you've been saying on forums. So the mail might be really quite advanced, and it takes a bit of sort of thinking. So whenever somebody says, open this file or click on this link, just really make sure you know what it is you're clicking on. And is it really a zip file, or is it called a zip file but it's really a .exe and it's going to infect your computer? When in doubt, hold off and ask help with that, because this is the way to defeat most security systems. Yeah.
Can I ask if you're getting a lot of these emails? I get like DHL ones all the time.
Yeah.
Big ones. Do you just delete them? Or
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, personally, I have a collection of these to show to people, but most more normal people, I would say just delete them. But yes, I have a growing, wide, and varied collection of these kinds of emails, and they're quite interesting, some of them. So another thing that you can do that is fairly easy and fairly cheap is to use different browsers for different things. So I have 3 sort of main web browsers that I use for like 3 levels of wanting to be secure. The Tor browser, which we'll install today on anybody's computer who wants it, which is a free web browser. It's slow, it doesn't do things like YouTube, but it does route your traffic in different other places across the world, and so it makes it very hard to identify who you are and where you are. And you can press a button in the browser and you'll create a new identity, and your traffic will be rerouted through 3 other points on the planet, and then you'll be a new person online. So you might appear to be in Brazil or in the Ukraine or in Zurich or in northern Canada. You can press a button and now suddenly you're on another continent from the perspective of the person watching you surf. So if you use this and you don't log into something with it, thereby identifying yourself, you can be anonymous and you can hide the location from which you are surfing, which can be really useful. But the browser is slow and it's feature limited. So you probably don't want to use it for everything. Now, and then I have, on the other end of the spectrum, I have a browser where I do, the occasional social media stuff. Under protest, I've started to use my Facebook page because I need it for some teaching programs in the Netherlands, where some of the educational institutions now actually use Facebook as a digital classroom, with the argument, oh, all the students are already on it. It's like, yes, of course, because otherwise they can't go to the university anymore. It's like, really, it makes your head explode when you think about this stuff. So I use it as little as possible, but every now and then I log in. And I do that in a separate browser that I don't do much else with, because that browser is now completely leaking all kinds of information. Twitter, all that sort of stuff, I do that over there. And then I have the thing in the middle, which is the Firefox browser, which I tool up with all kinds of plugins. And this is what I do most of my work with: reading news sites, accessing my company intranets, writing on wikis, going to my Mega account, all those kinds of things. So it's good to, in your individual case, to think about sort of 3 zones of activity where you have more or less privacy requirements, and to divvy up sort of your daily work in these 3 zones where, the really high security stuff you do there. Yes, it's a bit slower, but it's worth it. In the middle, this is sort of good enough for most of what you do, and then there is this, no expectation of privacy zone, and you just keep that in a separate space as well. So just to understand why certain programs are inherently insecure and others are not. When software is written in a sort of modern way, this is what's being written by a programmer. It's called the programming language. You can sort of understand it a little bit if you spend a small amount of time thinking about it. And then what we do is we take the program code, the source code, and we stick it in a piece of software called a compiler. And the compiler optimizes this program code into binary code, which is easier for machines to work with. Because this is good for humans to read with a bit of training, but really crappy for a machine to deal with, for a computer. Computer prefers this. And then particularly per computer hardware platform. So, you have a different compiler for an Android phone than for an Intel laptop. This all, depends on the chip. So this is what we stick in the computer, and then the computer does the command and runs the program. Now, with most software that people buy, although you don't actually buy it, you just buy the right to use it, under conditions set by the seller, and these conditions can be repurposed very quickly. But you just get this. And so it does something, but it might also do other things, like sending all your text messages to somebody in Panama. But you wouldn't know because you can't read this. Even if you're a programmer, you can't read this. So, and most people can learn basic programming in an afternoon. But this is, of course, is just opaque. So this is what most software is like, and it's a complete disaster from a security perspective. Now, with free software, also known as open source software sometimes, but free software is the correct term, as Richard pointed out yesterday, you not only get this, but you also get this. So you can verify, or you can have somebody verify for you independently that the software actually does what it says on the tin and nothing else. Also, you can adapt it to your needs that may vary. And then you can run it through your own compiler and have a program that you use. So especially when it comes to security things, if I don't get that with the software, I don't even want to use it. I don't even want to consider using it. It's completely ridiculous. Because how can you know that there is no backdoor? So all the software will be showing and using. We'll download that for use, but you can check that it actually is there. And many other people do. So it's not that you individually have to check every line of code, but you know that there are thousands of other people in the world, independent experts, with an interest in exposing any funny business that might be going on. The funny thing is that the Prism infrastructure itself runs entirely on free software. Because these are smart computing people. They know what the best software is, right? So they're using it as well. So this is an example of that. This is an Ubuntu desktop, which is an alternative to Windows or Mac OS. I'm using it right now. It's free in both terms. It's free as in free software, where your freedoms to use it, inspect it, alter it are not impeded by the person you're getting it from. It's also free as in cost, which is also nice if you need to deal with limited budgets. And yes, so it turns out that commercial vendors, I'm sorry, but we just cannot trust them. I mean, it shouldn't be news. Big evil corporation, multiple convicted monopolist, sells customers down the river for money. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, but now we have documentary proof of it.
Is there any history of antivirus software companies putting backdoors for?
Yes.
There is?
Yes. McAfee many years ago already said that their software would not recognize FBI-designed software that is launched on FBI targets to spy on them.
No, I mean putting spy software on the antivirus stuff. It would be
they might do that too. Of course, they wouldn't tell. But McAfee has actually admitted that they would not detect government-created viruses, which are used to target dissidents and criminals, but mostly dissidents. Mostly peace activists and environmental activists. That's actually mostly what it's used for in practice. I mean, most criminals, tend to be smart enough these days about this stuff to not use those kinds of things. So this is one of the things we'll be teaching people today, if you want to, how to encrypt your email in a very secure, cheap, fairly easy to use way. So Bob wants to send a message to Alice. What Bob does, he grabs from a web server Alice's public key, which is a piece of information to encrypt data that is not secret. It's just on servers, you can download it. He can check that it actually belongs to Alice, and he uses it to encrypt a message from that to this. This is what is sent over the internet. It may be intercepted, but nobody can read it. The only person who can now read the message is Alice, because Alice has the complementary private key, which is sort of the other half of that, which is on her computer and never goes anywhere, so it never can be intercepted or broken down, and then she uses that to decrypt the message, and she can read the message. And of course, if she wants to send a message back, it goes in reverse. This is in a nutshell what public key encryption is, where the most important bit, the decryption bit, never leaves your computer. Because as soon as you need to transport this over a network, it can be intercepted and thus broken into, so we want to prevent that. So somebody came up with a system where you have a public part that you don't have to keep secret, that you can give to everybody so they can send you messages, and then the private part that you keep absolutely private, only on your laptop and nowhere else. This is what that looks like. So if I send a message, then it goes over the net like this. Now I make it a practice, for instance with my partner, we send everything we send each other encrypted, even the shopping list. Now that's not because we shop for very interesting things, but it is just good practice to not leak information about what mails are important and what mails are not. So just encrypt everything so that even the information about what is important and what is not leaked, because you're encrypting some things and some things you don't. The one sort of weak point really about current email encryption is that the subject of the mail is not encrypted. This is just basically a design limitation back from the old days of email. And that can be very annoying because you really need to think about what you put into the subject. But it's also a really nice way to mindfuck with whomever is trying to tap you, of course. Right? So you have to just get really, really creative and just have fun with that. So these are some of the tools we'll be using. The Thunderbird email program with OpenPGP, which is the thing that manages the whole crypto stuff. This is all free software, again, both in price and in, more importantly, freedom. And the Tor browser, which allows a high level of anonymous web surfing. And this link, so you can get this presentation later and look at it, Secure Comms, type my name and Secure Comms into Google. I have a whole page where everything I'm talking about now and all the pieces of software, they're all written down there and they're linked to, and you can download it for your various platforms. So one of the other things that I use is a VPN. So I connect my network traffic from this box to a computer in Switzerland, and then from there I enter the internet. And then I might do additional things on top to pretend to be somewhere else again, but that's sort of the default setting that I use. Now the disadvantage of a service like this, of course, is that you have to pay for it, which means that probably you'll have to, at least at some level, identify yourself, although with a prepaid credit card you can avoid most of that as well. But this does a lot to sort of hide your geographical location, for instance. It also means that now your surfing behavior falls under Swiss law, which is a lot better than most other countries in the world. Now I don't want to advertise this particular company, that's not the point. There are hundreds of companies providing all kinds of services at all kinds of price levels, so you just have to pick one or two or maybe even have several. I mean, you have 3 browsers, so you could conceivably run each of individual browser to a different service in a different country, just to really, make life hard for somebody trying to track you. So with email crypto, the content, but also the integrity of your communications is protected. So the 2 things that email encryption does for you, A, it encrypts the mail. That's really good. But it also it creates a digital signature underneath your mail based on the contents of the mail. And so now the person receiving the mail can verify that it actually came from you and could not have sent by anybody else, and that the message had not been altered in transit. Which again, it might be just as important that hiding the content is guaranteeing the integrity of the message, that it hasn't been changed. Changing one word in an email can have quite significant consequences if you don't know it's been done. Now Tor is a web browser. It protects your IP address and therefore, in most cases your location, and it can protect your identity to a large extent as long as you don't use it to log into stuff. And we have some other things like a chat program with a plugin called Off the Record that allows you to chat like you do it maybe in Facebook or in Skype. And then also that content is protected. So those are some of the basic tools.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Are there any other ways of encrypting communication? Because I think if I start emailing encrypted emails to Pakistan now, that's probably gonna draw a lot of attention to me, doesn't it?
That is possible. That is possible. There are also more advanced tricks where you can actually try to hide the fact that you're sending a message. So the problem with mail encryption right now is, of course, A, the subject is clear. who you are and who you're sending to is not protected, and the fact that you are sending a message is not protected. So it is limited in that way. So
the fact that you've got this software perched on your laptop, so when your police kick in your door at 6:30 and confiscate all of your kit, the first question they ask you in an interview is going to be, "So, sir, why do you have all this stuff on your laptop?"
yeah, well, and the fact that we are there should be the fact that you're even considering that this is a real scenario in a Western country shows how far we've come in the last decade, sort of.
It's not a crime to use encryption.
Because,
So
because actually we've made this thing, UN Declaration of Human Rights, Article 14, privacy is a human right, period. It's not even, so, I mean, it's true, police will do this stuff nowadays, but it just goes to show how completely insane the situation is.
So
That,
I don't mean to be contrarian,
Yeah.
but
no, obviously. I mean, we have, I think in the UK now, the police can force you under pain of imprisonment to surrender your crypto key. But then at least you know that, they're getting into the system. Because previously, if you didn't use it, they would just hoover up all your mail and you wouldn't know. So at least now you have a signal and you can tell your lawyer, okay, tell all my contacts that, this crypto key is now going to be broken. And when I get out of jail, we'll, make a new one. And other people need to do things to now secure themselves because this, I'm going to have to giving them the key because they're forcing me for some ways.
Sorry, did you say that the police can force you to give up your crypto?
Yes. The passwords to it. Yes.
How do they do that?
They can just say, you're going to be in jail until you give us the password.
But we have a right to the privacy of...
no, it's the regulation.
No. They just slap terrorism on you or something, and then if you are accused of terrorism, no proof necessary, you can be held in custody until you surrender your password. Period. So yeah, that's quite bad. But again, then at least they're trying to get into your system, whereas previously you would not. So encryption is not perfect. IT security is not perfect. It does not protect you from somebody putting a gun to your head and asking you to type in the password. I mean, there are some tricks for that as well, where what you can do is you can have two passwords. A duress password and a normal password, and then the laptop will actually show a different side of itself, but that's sort of quite advanced stuff. The problem with using that, of course, is if the government knows or suspects that you're using it, now you need to prove that you've given them your real password, or they will continue to torture you, right? So it's quite a nice trick to do technically, but the long-term implications might be quite severe because now you need to prove a negative to people who are in the process of torturing you. So that's not a lot of fun. So civil liberties, like our right to privacy, use it or lose it. That's basically always the case. I've seen a lot of proposals from MPs in various European countries over the last decade who basically want to ban encryption. Ban encrypted phones, ban usage of encrypted email, things like that. I mean, it's really quite completely crazy. And then, because it is used by either terrorists or child pornographers or criminals, it's becoming quite the vogue. Now, all the technical things that you need to do, we're going to do some stuff today, but we can only do so much in a few hours. There is a really nice London hackerspace where lots of very cool people do cool technological and socially relevant projects. Those hackerspaces exist all over the world, hackerspaces.org. You can find one for your country in the city where you live. These are informal gatherings of people who just like to do creative stuff with technology. And one of the ways of having access to very high sort of technical knowledge and expertise and thinking about these things in an ongoing manner is to just build a relationship with a place like that. Don't walk in there with your laptop and demand help. They're not an IT service desk, right? Because then most of these people actually do have professional day jobs where they might charge enormous amounts of money for their professional knowledge and services. But if you build a relationship with them, maybe you go and interview them and write a nice article about the socially interesting things that they're doing there. They love that sort of stuff. And then, if you come by and say, hey, could you maybe help me out here for a bit, for 15 minutes with my laptop? Yeah, I'm the journalist that wrote that piece that you have on your wall there. Oh, no, sure, they'll help you out. Building relationship with those groups is really, really a good way to have access to very high level of knowledge without, having to fork out £200 an hour for somebody fixing a problem, and then, you don't even know if you can trust them. So the London Hackerspace is a really good place. I was there Thursday evening doing this talk for a bunch of activists and also some journalists. Also, if you're interested in this stuff, at the end of this month, for 4 days, we'll have the once in a 4-year big European hacker party just north of Amsterdam. Julian Assange is going to be speaking by video, and there will be somebody walking around with a tablet on which Julian Assange will be by video link, hopefully. Karsten Knoll, who is the guy that cracked the Oyster card. So, if you're paying for your Oyster card, you don't need to. Just get a Samsung phone and you can charge it for free, right? Because the crypto on that is completely broken. Thomas Drake is a former NSA employee who blew the whistle a couple of years ago and was nearly imprisoned for it. He just managed to dodge that bullet. We're going to have several former spooks there talking about this stuff. There are still a few tickets I saw this morning in the ticket shop, but we are nearing the 3,000 participant limit. So it's going to be quite a cool party. About 200 lectures, 100 workshops, and of course the entire field will have like 10 gigabit internet connections, and there's 3D printers and metal workshops and all kinds of cool things. So everybody who's interested in it, come over for a day or a few days. And should you get bored, then Amsterdam is only 45 minutes away, so I'm sure you can be entertained over there. Right. So that's the theory part. These are my coordinates. This is where this presentation is. If you change PDF into PPT, you got the editable PowerPoint version. On this link, there's lots of just basic text and lots of links to pieces of software that you can use. And so we have maybe a little bit of time for Q&A, a few short questions, and then we have a short break. And then after that, anybody who wants to get hands-on with us and actually get some of this stuff working on your computer, stick around and we'll get you tooled up. Thanks for your attention.